There's another, and this time opposite way, to answer the same question wrong in the same way. So, our big question is, what is the task of theology? What are we actually studying when we do theology? What's the object of our study? It's very popular in this modern world that we live in to say that all we're doing when we do theology is talking about ourselves. We're studying our prayer lives, our church activities, our devotional life, our acts of piety. And there's two ways to get at this wrong answer. The first way we just looked at, and that's with not enough transcendence. This is the way of Friedrich Schleiermacher, the father of theological liberalism, where God is just the source of my feeling of absolute dependence. And so I start with that feeling and then ask myself, what does that feeling generate? So I'm really just talking about myself. But there's an opposite way to get at that same wrong answer. And this is the mistake of insufficient immanence. So with Schleiermacher, God is just myself in a really loud voice. But the opposite mistake is to push God so high up and so high, so far away that all that's left is just myself. And that's the mistake of Immanuel Kant, who is a very important modern philosopher, an ethicist who lived in Königsberg, Prussia. Königsberg, Prussia. And Kant is very hard to read. Most of his writings are very dense and very difficult to wade through. He's a brilliant, um, pivotal thinker in the modern world, but he's so important because what Kant did way back in the 18th century, it took about 200 years, but now his thought has filtered down and it's influenced most people on the street. People who've never read Kant are now influenced by Kant. But to understand Kant, you first have to understand David Hume, a very significant philosopher in his own right. But to understand Hume, you have to understand John Locke. Sorry, not him. That's John Locke. So again, John Locke dates again, born in 1632, died in 1704, and Locke is an empiricist, right? He's Rene Descartes' balancer. So Rene Descartes is the rationalist. I think, therefore I am. What can I prove? What can I know for sure from my own mind? Locke is the counterpoint. He's the empiricist. His Latin phrase is tabula rasa. So Locke said that we're all born like blank slates. And when we see things or hear things or sense things, when we experience things, those sensations, they mark us. They write on our slates. He calls these simple concepts that we have. And then our minds can take these simple concepts and combine them with other concepts that we've perceived or sensed, and we produce compound concepts. So, for instance, you've never seen a unicorn in your whole life, except maybe on your childhood bedroom wall. But you have seen a horse and you have seen a horn, and your mind can put these together into a unicorn. So that's how Locke said the mind works. So the point is, all that we know comes through our five senses. Then our mind takes those things and combines them. So if I could draw a picture for you, it would be think of a person, like a stick person who's the knowing, the subject of knowledge, the knower, the one who looks out and sees, and then just imagine a tree, the object of knowledge. And Locke would say, all knowledge comes from looking of the tree, comes from looking at the tree, touching the tree, feeling the roughness of the bark, smelling the aroma of the flowers, maybe eating the fruit and tasting it. So all knowledge of the tree comes through the five senses. Then our minds can take all of those various percepts and combine them in new concepts. So Locke's very important because he's an empiricist and he laid the foundation for modern science. Right? Modern science operates on experience and what you know through your senses and and running experiments. Well, David Hume came along, and Hume is often called the destroyer of the modern project. So think Descartes, the rationalist, and Locke, the empiricist, are very heady and optimistic. We can do this. We're going to throw off centuries of Christian, religious, Western superstition, and we're going to, from the ground up, believe in ourselves and only believe what we can prove, and we will build these cathedrals of knowledge, and modern science will just take off, and we will, the enlightened, this was the Enlightenment, right? The enlightened European white males, we will bring it home, and we can do this. Well, David Hume said, not so fast. David Hume was Scottish. To place him, he died in 1776, and he was just, he's kind of like the Stephen Colbert or the David Letterman of the 18th century. He liked to poke. He liked to show you why your views weren't all that great. He wasn't a good builder. He didn't actually produce his own ways of knowledge that could be tested, but he liked to show you why your thinking was not that great. So when it comes to Locke and his empiricism, he said, okay, so let me get this straight. You're saying that all knowledge comes through your five senses, right? So you know the tree is there because you see the tree, you smell the tree, you touch the tree, and that's how you know the tree's there. But if you think about it, all you really know is not the tree itself. All you actually know are that you feel the tree. I can explain using the sense of touch, right? So if you're at home, just take your hand and touch the table. What do you feel? You feel smoothness, coolness, hardness. That's what you feel, right? You would say that, I think I also feel the table. Are you sure? Can you prove it? You see, your touch of your sense of touch is bounded by your skin. You can't get outside of your skin and into the table. You can't actually prove the table's there. All you really know for sure is that you feel the table. So your senses of you're sensing something, but the thing that's actually there, the object, it's outside of you. How do you actually know it's there? Well, Locke said, well, I think common sense. Common sense says if you feel the table's there. And Hume said, I'm sorry. I thought we were doing philosophy. You can't cheat, right? You're the modern people. You're saying we're going to start with ourselves with ruthless certainty. We will only believe what we can prove. You can't prove the table's there. Have you seen The Matrix? This isn't what Hume said, but have you seen The Matrix? It's not Matrix 2 and 3. That's not worth your time. But The Matrix, right? The whole point of The Matrix is maybe all of this could be just a computer software program. Now, I don't think so, but try and prove it's not. If you're in the computer and you're part of the software, you can't get outside and prove it's not just a software program. So Hume's point is, if you're going to demand utter proof for knowledge, I don't think you got much. There's very little you can prove. So Hume was skeptical of three big things. There's Kant again, we'll come back to him. But David Hume was skeptical of essences of other things. I think the essence of the tree or the essence of the table. All you really know is that you feel the table, you smell the tree. You don't really know the tree is there. Same thing with the self, right? How do you prove that you actually exist? Every idea, every sense, every thought you have of yourself comes with a feeling attached. So right now, you're feeling bored, or you're feeling hungry, or you're feeling tired, or maybe you're happy. Maybe philosophy just really excites you and you're just full of joy. I hope so. But whatever it is, right? You have these feelings that are intertwined with who you are. You can't separate the feelings and get a clear shot at what is this I? What is this self that feels these things? And so Hume said, well, if you should be skeptical of the tree and the essence and the table, I think how do you even know that you exist? And then for our purposes, we want to focus on this one. Hume said, also God, right? The modern people, like Kant, they still thought they could prove, or they knew there was a God, that God existed. Maybe not the Christian God, but there was a God who would judge us someday and hold us accountable. But Hume said, he wrote this dialogues concerning natural religion. It was a dialogue with three friends, and one of them, who's a skeptic, Philo, he kept poking holes in the deistic modern view of God. He said things like, well, what do you think God prefers, hot or cold? And you might think, well, I think both, because we have hot things and cold things. How about sweet or sour? Well, I think God's okay with both, because we have sweet things and sour things, sometimes sweet and sour things. What about good or evil? Well, you want to say God, he prefers prefers good, but there is evil too. So, that's a good one. Why do we have good and evil in a world in which a good, all-powerful God reigns? Well, Hume said, through this character Philo, maybe because this world was made by a committee of gods. And you know how committees always kind of leave some loose ends? Maybe that's why we have a world that's not quite up to snuff. Or maybe this world was made by a young God, a child God. He was just starting out, and this is one of his very first worlds, and there are other worlds that are better than this one, but he was learning the ropes. Or maybe it was made by a retired God, an old God who came out of retirement, the Brett Favre of gods, who wanted just one last fling, and he made the world, and he just should have let well enough be. So Hume just liked to raise questions and throw dirt in the air and make you realize that maybe you don't know as much as you thought you did. Well, that brings us to Immanuel Kant. Kant, again, an ethicist who lived an extremely boring life. They say the widows on his street could set their watches by every day, the same time. In the afternoon, Kant would walk up and down his street 8 times. Just an extremely boring person. But what Kant did in the 18th century in a Prussian university, that's northeast Germany, I think around Berlin, what he did then, it took 200 years to filter down, but it's now everywhere. It's infecting our culture in a really big way. So I want to explain what Kant did and why it's important. And I want to start by saying Kant, he meant well. He tried to do a good thing. He wanted to defend God and the self and essences. He wanted to protect belief in these things from the skepticism of David Hume. See, Kant read Hume and he said, oh my goodness, he's right. We can't prove there's the self and the essence of the tree or the table. And we can't prove there's a God. But we need all of these things or we can't even live. For instance, with God, because that's our focus, right? Kant was an ethicist. And he said, my job is to tell people to be good and to be moral. But if there's no God, well, good luck with that. If there's no God, people will do whatever they can get away with. How do you get people to shape up and do what's right? You tell them there's an afterlife with a supreme being who will judge you for everything you've ever done. So fly right. So Kant said, I need to protect belief in God. Even though Hume is right, I really can't prove him. So here's what Kant did. It was clever and ingenious, but had terrible consequences that are still with us. Kant, he basically agreed with Hume and said, you know what, you're right. I cannot know the existence of the tree or the table or the self or God. I can't know them. But you know what? I can still believe in them. I can have faith in them. And so Kant separated faith, the realm of faith, from the realm of knowledge. Think of the higher world, the world of faith, and the lower world, the world of knowledge. Or think again if you're looking at that tree, so I'm the knower and I'm looking at the tree. There are phenomena, the roughness of the bark, the aroma of the flowers, the taste of the fruit, the phenomena, the appearances I can know. But what lies deeper, the essence of the tree, that's something I cannot know. That's in the noumenal world. So Kant divided everything up into the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. The phenomenal world is the world of appearances that you can know. But the deeper essences of things, you can't know these things, but you can still believe in them. You can't see them because it's like looking at a 3D movie without the special glasses. There are still phenomena, there are still surface things you can see, but there's deeper things there that you cannot make out because you don't have the right mental equipment. So Kant said it's not God's fault that we can't see these things. It's our fault. We're limited. We just can't see into the essences of things, but we have to believe they're there, because if there's no essence of the tree or essence of the table, then what unites all these things that we sense? Same thing with the self. There must be a self, because what unites all my feelings of boredom and weariness and hunger and joy? There must be something that unites them. And then what about God? Well, Kant says, I'm an ethicist. I've got to believe there's a God. Otherwise, people won't be moral. So Kant wrote two important books. He wrote more, but these two, they kind of parallel. He wrote one book called The Critique of Pure Reason, another book called The Critique of Practical Reason. Again, really tough sledding. I'm not saying you should go read them, but I'll just summarize the main point. Critique of Pure Reason, that's philosophy. And Kant says, I don't have a pure philosophical reason for knowing that God exists. I can't prove that God exists. But I've got a practical reason. And for think practice, think ethics. I've got an ethical reason for believing in God. Think of maybe another example would be this is a classic Robin Williams movie. He plays a serious person. I think it's called Awakenings. And there are these people that are in this nursing home. And they've been in a catatonic state, some of them for decades. And at one point in the movie, one of the doctors says, what if these people, they've been unable to express any movement, any actions toward us or anyone for 30, 40 years. But what if inside their minds are alert? What if they're awake? What if they know what's going on and they just can't express themselves? And one of the doctors said, well, of course not. Well, how do you know? Well, because that would be unthinkable. You see, that's a practical reason. He doesn't know for sure, but no, it just can't be. I can't accept that for practical reasons, not medical reasons. Or think of the whole abortion question. People who are pro-choice, they have to say the babies that are being aborted, they're not persons. Now they don't know that. They don't have a medical proof for that. In fact, the ultrasounds and the scans that are being done now show pretty strongly that looks like a real baby in there that should be kept. But if someone is pro-choice, they have to say, for practical reasons, that's not an actual real human person. Otherwise, the consequences are just unbearable. So Kant says, I don't have a pure philosophical reason, but I've got a practical, moral reason for believing in God. I need God. I need the concept of God, or I can't teach ethics. Good luck getting people to be good if there is no judgment. So here's a summary of what Kant did. He agreed with Hume and said, you're right, Hume, we can't prove these things, so we can't know them. All we know are appearances, but I can kick these things upstairs in this higher noumenal world, and even though I can't know there's a God, I can still believe in him. In fact, I need to believe in him. So Kant, he rescues God by saying, I can no longer know God, but doggone it, I can still have faith in him. I can still believe in him. But think about that. What is left of this God after the rescue? I like to compare this to if you have a really tall person in a burning house in a very small window, and the firefighters have to cut off arms and legs to get the guy out of the window. You might say, "Look, I saved you." Yeah, but there's not much left of me. Something like that with God. Kant saved God. We can still believe in him. Hallelujah. But I can't know him, right? God becomes this unknowable X, this unknowable blank. And notice there's a built-in contradiction there, right? How is God unknowable? Do you know that he's unknowable? How do you know that? If you know that, he's not unknowable. So just to show you that if we don't start with the Bible, if we don't start with God's revelation, if we start with ourselves and only believe what we can prove, we will always end up in pretzels and contortions and contradictions. So there's a built-in contradiction here that God is the unknowable blank. What that means is revelation becomes impossible. Think of it this way. By kicking God upstairs, Kant protected God from the skepticism of David Hume. Hume's skeptical arguments could no longer reach God. He's safe. But Hume is now also safe from God. Because if God is this unknowable blank, God can't talk to Hume. God can't impinge on his life and tell him who he is and what he demands and what he expects. Hume is now free to live as he pleases also. So by putting God so high that he becomes unknowable, we preclude even the possibility of God speaking to us. So you can believe in God, you just can't know him. And that leads to what we see today, pluralism and relativism. Why is every take on God acceptable? Because nothing is right. God can't be known. If nothing is right, nothing can be wrong. Every perspective is okay. So maybe you've had this experience where you've told someone that you're going to seminary, and they said basically, bless your heart. Right? How hard can that be? You're in seminary. Good for you. But if you're in med school or law school, whoa, that's impressive. Right? You are studying really hard things and things that you know. But in seminary, I'm assuming you sit around and share your feelings about God and your perspective. And now I have perspectives too. You want to hear my take? And everything is equal because God's unknowable anyway. Another example for this would be a Sally McFaig. She's a radical feminist theologian. She wrote a book called Models of God, in which she said, as a woman, it doesn't resonate with me to call God Father, Son, Spirit. Those are male words. But to call God Mother, Daughter, Friend, that's better. I like that. I'm going to call God Mother, Daughter, Friend. Why is she free to change the revelation? Well, because God's unknowable. And if God's unknowable, call him or her whatever you feel like, whatever means the most to you. Now, to be clear about this, God is not male, right? God transcends gender. I said that in a sermon recently, that God transcends gender. And afterwards, someone asked, did you say that God is transgender? So be sure to enunciate if you ever say that. God is not transgender. God transcends gender. God is not male. He's not female. He transcends all of it. But his revealed name is Father. Right? Jesus said, pray our Father who is in heaven. So I don't think we're free to just change that revelation and say, well, I've had a hard time with my dad, or especially a young woman who's been abused by her dad. I can appreciate why you might want to say, you know what, it's just too hard for you to call God Father. Call him Mother, call him something that resonates with you. And I think it's well-intentioned often, but think about what we're actually doing. We're telling this poor woman who's been abused by her father that I guess you'll never have a dad. I guess you don't get one. Call God Mother, call God something, but you'll always be an orphan. Wouldn't it be better to tell this poor poor person. Um, this is going to be a long, arduous, painful process. But you just need to know that you have a dad. And your earthly dad was a terrible, jerkish imposter of the real thing. But you are not an orphan. You've got a father. And our goal is that someday you can look to heaven and call God Father and know that you belong. So we should tie ourselves to God's revelation in the Bible. We shouldn't just change it up because it doesn't fit where we're coming from. So we have pluralism today. Another example of this would be Oprah's final show. She says, for all of you who get riled up when I mention God and want to know which God I'm talking about, well, I'm talking about the same God you're talking about. I'm talking about the Alpha and Omega, the omniscient, the omnipresent, the ultimate consciousness, the source, the force, the all of everything there is, the one, the only G-O-D. That's the one I'm talking about. You see how that's very non-specific? Right? If you're talking about all of them, you're not really talking about any one of them. God is he's a particular, very specific being. He's the Father of Jesus Christ. That's the one we're talking about because that's what the Bible says God is like. One last thing, and then we've got to go. This is really important, and we'll say more about this in class, but Kant separated faith from knowledge, and this is still very much with us. So there are things that you know, like the realm of science and medicine and math, maybe botany, right? There are things down here on earthly things that we know, but the spiritual things, the things that pertain to God, we can't really know them. We just believe in them. We have faith in them. Let me just tell you, that's devastating for the Christian life. That's pure fideism. That's take a blind leap and hope it all works out. Let me just say this, and then we'll pick this up in class. But faith, here's what faith means. Faith just means to trust. Faith just means to rest, to go all in, to push all your chips in the center of the table, to put all your weight on something. That's what faith is. Well, if you're a wise believer, you will always only commit to what you know. You'll never commit wholeheartedly to something you don't know. And we know this is true in every area of life. Right? You wouldn't leave your car with a mechanic who said, you know what, beats me what's wrong, but I'll drop it off and I'll change a few parts and see if it works. You won't go in for surgery if your doctor says, thank you, I've been waiting my whole life to try one of these. If you're in the dentist chair and you say, will this hurt? And she says, I don't know, let's find out. You'll get out of that chair, right? In every area of life, if you're on an airplane and the pilot says, whoo, they'll never catch me now, in a kind of a drunken slur, you're going to get off that plane, right? You don't commit to what you don't know. That's just common sense. Why is God the only area in all of our existence where we say knowledge gets in the way? Like knowledge is an obstacle to faith. The less you know, the better off you are. We need to know less so that we can flex our faith muscles. Why is God the exception to the rule? Because we're all Kantians now. We've all accepted this terrible divorce of faith from knowledge. And we think the less we know, spiritually speaking, the more room we have to fly, the more room we have to jump. Just know that in the Bible, God never commands or expects anyone to believe or obey anything that may or may not be true. God always tells his people to commit to what they know. He never tells us to commit to what we don't. So we start with God's promises, and we claim those promises, and we take God's commands and we obey those commands. If you've got a promise from God or a command from God, that's faith. When you claim that promise and obey that command. Faith is not just taking flying leaps, taking risky risks, and hoping God catches you or bails you out. Faith is claiming God's promises, obeying his commands. Believe what you know. It's more than you think. So we'll explain this in class, but think about, and we'll have examples, but think of any examples in your experience that separates faith from knowledge, especially when it comes to church or spiritual things. Christmas is pretty big about this. I'll just end with this, but the Polar Express, there's a bell that rings at the end of the Polar Express. Well, is the bell ringing or is it not ringing? Well, it depends. The children can hear it because they got faith. They're not stuffy, rational adults. So a child can hear it, but the adults who are very rational, they don't hear the bell. Really? So the bell is ringing depending on if you have knowledge or not. That's Kant, right? It feels very mystical, very spiritual, very Christmassy, but it's actually just, it's Kant. And we've got to stop separating faith from knowledge. Faith just means, all it means is commit. And God is not a special case. We should commit to what we know about God, not to what we don't. All right, I'll stop there and we'll see you in class and we'll talk more about this. Thanks.